The government shutdown and default debate have caused everybody stress, from the retired teacher with a pension to America's biggest corporations, all worried, all more cautious with their spending and investment. And that's one of the tragedies of these past 2 weeks, because before then, the American economy was really showing impressive signs of revival. Those positive signs are what I talked to Goldman Sachs' chairman and CEO, LLoyd Blankfein, about when I sat down with him recently at the Clinton Global Initiative's annual meeting here in New York. Listen in. Lloyd, when you look at the U.S. political system, it seems deadlocked, paralyzed, use whatever phrase one wants. But the American economy seems to be coming back in a pretty broad way.
Well, the American, because it's pretty resilient. And listen, the American economy, you're right, it's doing well, and there's a lot of tailwinds, energy, you could tick through the amount of tailwinds that are happening, but I think ultimately it's the culture of the United States. We all had the same noise, the same stirring and drawing, the same, dealing with the consequences of the credit bubble. But in the United States, we recapitalized the bank. It was painful. People didn't like the way it was done. Nobody liked, and by the way, and the aftermath was also hard. But it got done, restructured, accepted a higher unemployment rate. In other words, didn't make people keep the same employment. Didn't, as often happens in Europe, when you have that different balance between social interests and economic interests. Did all that painful stuff, and now it's as noisy as can be. In other jurisdictions, you had all the noise, you had all the confrontation, but you didn't actually get anything done. And all that remains forward. So the United States is in a position where, again, banks are recapitalized, companies are efficient, not because they protected employment, sadly, because they accepted higher rates of unemployment. That's a social decision that gets made. It's not unreasonable to make a different one, but that's what gets made in the United States. But now that those companies are stronger, they're in a position to grow, to hire people back, run their businesses on a sustainable basis, very liquid, a lot of cash, and I think well positioned for the recovery. And by the way, what growth we have now, it's not that QE represents the first step to normalization and we're all tense and nervous whether the economy can absorb it. We've already taken a substantial number of steps towards normalization. The biggest subsidy the economy had was the fact that we were spending so much money than we were taking it in taxes. We've closed up a substantial amount of that budget gap. Sequestration, payroll taxes, higher taxes on others. One step towards normalization was for the 10-year interest rate to go from 1.5% to almost 3%. Those are all steps towards normalization. The removal of the tapering off of QE will be another step, but it's not the first step.
So you don't fear it? You're not one of these people who says once the Fed starts withdrawing these extraordinary measures, the whole system is going to collapse?
It joins a long parade of things over which I'm anxious, and that's an element. But the point is, it is not the first step, and can the economy, whatever growth we're seeing now, is already in the face of the headwinds of a convergence of our spending and our revenue, maybe not to the same place that some people would want it, but maybe 2/3 there.
Right, you're 2/3 of the way to Simpson Bowles' target.
And so everything, all the growth we see this year is in the face of that. In other words, we've already absorbed some of the consequences of normalization. The tapering of QE is not the first step.
But Lloyd, let me ask you this: is it fair to make this, kind of moral equivalence, if you will? Yes, both parties are moving in partisan directions, but only one party is threatening to blow up the United States' credit rating.
Yeah, that's right at the moment. And look, you can find fault again in the substance of it. You could say also part of the problem was, this is not we don't have a parliamentary system. We have a system where the moderates of both parties are supposed to unite together and have a moderate solution, which, by the way, may or may not be the right result. But it certainly brings about the most stable result. Right. Because then when the party in power shifts, the next party had already signed on to it, made its contribution, owns it. For one moment in time in my life, we had a parliamentary system, in effect, where you had both houses had a veto-proof majority, and the president was of one party, so it was effectively a parliamentary system. And it passed legislation without having to compromise, and consequently, it didn't. And that created a very unstable situation. So the reaction to that, I think, is a terrible reaction. You could go back to a first cause and say, if some of these elements and some of the legislation that had gone on in that period
had been passed with more Republican support,
and the concessions, maybe some modest concessions that would have had to make to earn that support, it would have been a much better, a much more stable outcome. Again, some people, does democracy produce the best results? In a way. It produces the most stable results, and the most stable tends to be the best results. So now we have a situation where we have Obamacare, and the Republicans want to destroy it. And the Democrats want to, and eventually you're going to have a change of government. It's not a good situation. So I could see the world through the lens of either side. Right now, my focus is really on what the Republicans are doing, which I think is which I don't consider to be the best constructive civic behavior. Because if they don't like the resolution, but it is resolved, to go about and say, I'm going to blow up the budget or I'm going to blow up the credit, I'm not going to pay for debts that I'd already taken on, I don't think that's right. If you go a step back and you see the underlying cause for their frustration, that wasn't right either.
Up next, more of my conversation with LLoyd Blankfein, including how he intends to mark the second anniversary of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
I must send flowers.
More of my conversation with LLoyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs. I was moderating a panel discussion at the Clinton Global Initiative. Along with Blankfein was Jim Rogers, who is retiring after 25 years as the CEO of Duke Energy, one of America's biggest energy providers, and Dennis O'Brien, the owner of Digicel. Listen in. One piece of the American recovery, Jim, has been the energy story. Tell us from your perspective, how big is that story? Of shale, of natural gas, of tight oil, all these things. I think everyone was expecting a technological revolution in energy, and they all expected it would be wind and solar. And there was a technological revolution in energy, but it was in the extraction of hydrocarbons. Correct?
That's correct. And actually, shale gas is probably the most transformative innovation that's occurred in this country in over a decade. It's been it's been, as Lloyd said, a tailwind to the economy, but also in terms of achieving our environmental goals. We're in the 1993, 92, 93 level of CO2 emissions in this country, and yet we have significantly more people and a much larger economy. So I think that it's been transformative both in driving our economy, but transformative in meeting our environmental objectives, at least as far as climate change is concerned.
That was Jim Rogers, the chairman of Duke Energy. I also asked my panelists about income inequality, a hot topic not only in America, but around the world these days. How did we get so unequal, and what responsibility do corporations have to fix the problem? Listen in. This is now a kind of anniversary of the Occupy movement. There's inequality and protests around inequality in many of these countries, from Brazil to Turkey.
To America.
Right. So let me ask you, looking back, with Occupy Wall Street, having its anniversary, what do you think it all means? The Goldman Sachs was not incidental to this whole issue.
I must have missed it. I didn't even realize this was such a big anniversary. I must send flowers. Look, I think there's in the world today, and partly as a result of rapid change in technology, there's a bit of a winner-take-all aspect in some of these aspects. If somebody makes a good product, they want the great product. There's no doubt that the flat world has had some adverse consequences in addition to the great consequences. All these open markets are making that, the manufacturing of every TV in the world is going to take place in Taiwan, and it's not going to take place here. And countries have to compete and win, and if a country comes in second, they may not get anything in a certain kind of product line. That's making for winners who win a lot, and a lot of people who aren't able to keep up competitively. And it's a very bad situation. And it's not just made better by income redistribution, because people don't want to just be sustained. Kids getting out of school need jobs. In order to have jobs, they have to be surrounded by people they have to be in a context in which things are made that other people want to buy. And that's not true in every place around the world, and it became less true in the United States over the last generation. So income redistribution is part of a fix of part of a problem, but the real thing in the United States and in other countries who want to be successful is you have to be competitive, and you have to make things that people want, and you have to make them at a rate where you can price them so that you beat out other competitors.
Dennis, how do you look at the issue of income inequality? Because even Ireland, I know that there's been a huge discussion about it because you've had a lot of growth, yeah, but you've had a huge expansion of income inequality.
Well, I think, certainly Ireland has had to take some really heavy doses of cod liver oil. It's been, very, very tough for 3 or 4 years. And we've seen real wages drop by, in many cases, about 20%. So, we had just as a country got ahead of ourselves. And now we're kind of an emerging economy again, along with Spain probably, and even Portugal. Just coming back to what Lloyd was talking about there, and you mentioned, obviously the Occupy Wall Street, I would be on the left of that, because I think we should be listening to some of the things that these people are saying, and I would actually have a sneaking regard for some of the things they say. And if you look at CGI, it's a perfect antidote to that, because major corporates, whether they're in the US or Europe or all around the world, multinationals need to do more in their communities. And, for example, Goldman Sachs has done fantastic community initiatives here in the US. But more and more, we need to move away from this ticking a box as a CSR statement in our annual reports to actually doing something impactful. And I think, particularly in Africa, particularly in all of the emerging markets, companies that go and invest in those countries really have to do something meaningful to actually change that country. And I think what this is all about is really doing that. People standing up and saying, making a promise to do something, and more of those kind of things. That activity will, I think, be the antidote to the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Did you learn anything from the Occupy Wall Street movement?
Well, there was a lot going on. There were a lot of lessons being given at the same time, and I have to. It's hard to separate them out, but of course I did. I'd like to, say something and respond. The biggest contribution that we make, and in fact, as I look at my fellow panelists, that they make, is not going to be in the philanthropic thing, although we do that also, but it's in our core businesses. And I think one thing I would like to say to the Occupy Wall Street interests and others is that business has helped lift people out of poverty, and philanthropy should fill in the gaps. But if I had to say which has made the best, whether it's philanthropy or businesses doing what their core activities are, I would take the latter.
That was LLoyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, along with Dennis O'Brien of Digicel and Jim Rogers of Duke Energy.